The day is March 21st, 2022, but for those in the hockey world, the day is better known as trade deadline day for the 2021-22 NHL season. Some teams had already done their deadline shopping early, as big names like Claude Giroux, Hampus Lindholm, and Ben Sherratt were all already off the board before March 21st, but with the clock ticking ever closer to 3 p.m. Eastern, many teams across the league were still scrambling to make last-minute additions to their roster in the hopes of going on a deep playoff run. One of those last-minute trades came down at the 11th hour between the Canadiens and the Avalanche, a deal that would send Artturi Lehkonen to Colorado in exchange for defensive prospect Justin Barron and a second-round pick in 2024. Now, was it the most seismic, earth-shattering trade of the deadline? Not at all. But in the end, it was Artturi Lehkonen and the Colorado Avalanche who got the last laugh. They went home with the Stanley Cup at the end of the year, while the other big-name trade targets had to watch the finals from their couch. Because more often than not, it's the smaller, more depth-fortifying moves like the Lehkonen trade that end up paying the largest dividends in the long run, especially in the modern NHL. He may not be a superstar, but he's the type of player who just makes teams better. This is the story of Artturi Lehkonen. Before he was a Stanley Cup champion, Artturi Lehkonen was a young prospect about to turn his sights to North America. At just 21 years old, the former second-round pick of the Montreal Canadiens managed to score 18 goals in his rookie season, 15 of which would come at 5-on-5. Among qualifying forwards who played at least 400 minutes at 5-on-5 that season, Lehkonen's 15 goals actually landed him in the 87th percentile in terms of 5-on-5 goal scoring relative to his peers. But it wasn't just the goals that were impressive. His underlying numbers were also something to take note of. He finished his rookie season with an individual 5-on-5 expected goals total of 13.13, the fifth highest 5-on-5 expected goals total among rookies that season. Now, sure, Lehkonen was mostly playing bottom 6 minutes, but nevertheless, the fact that his expected goals total was so high showed that the young forward already had a knack for finding and/or creating the kind of high-percentage shots that are, in turn, most likely to turn into goals. On top of that, the Habs as a team were better with Lehkonen on the ice that year. At 5-on-5, Montreal was out shooting their opponents, they were getting more high-danger chances for than their opponents, and they were expected to outscore their opponents with Lehkonen on the ice. For him to put up those kinds of numbers in just his first year playing on a North American sheet of ice, that's pretty special. And while he wouldn't find himself on any Calder ballots at the end of the year, it was still a very productive inaugural season that Lehkonen would use as momentum going forward. What followed was a 6-year stretch where Artturi Lehkonen would become one of the most consistent players in the league. Since 2017, he scored at least 10 goals at 5-on-5 in 4 out of 6 seasons, but he's also had an individual 5-on-5 expected goals total of 10 or higher in all but one season. Just to add a little bit of context, in the last 6 years, only 61 NHL forwards have had at least 5 seasons with an individual 5-on-5 expected goals total at or above 10, and Artturi Lehkonen is one of them. He may not be a flashy superstar goal scorer who can light the lamp 20 or even 30 times per year with regularity, but the fact of the matter is, even as the league has continued to evolve and change year over year, the quality of Lehkonen's chances has remained mostly constant, and it's what has allowed him to become such a reliable 5-on-5 goal scorer. His on-ice numbers have also become a thing of beauty. Starting with shot shares measured by shots for percentage where 50% is dead even and higher means better, Lehkonen has been a net positive player in all 7 years he's been in the NHL. By traditional theory, if you can outshoot your opponent, you have a better chance of winning the game. And for opposing NHL teams, seeing Lehkonen on the ice has become a sign that they're probably going to lose the shot battle for that shift. But it's not just the shot battle that teams are losing when facing off against Artturi Lehkonen, it's the chance battle as well. High danger chances for percentage is a stat that measures how often the team is getting more high danger scoring chances than they allow. And in the case of Lehkonen, he's also been a net positive player by high danger chances for percentage every year in his career so far. That kind of consistency really helps show just how big of an impact Lehkonen makes. His style of play makes him a threat every time he steps onto the ice, and if you fail to properly keep an eye on him, you're probably going to find a puck in the back of your net. In fact, we can use the more advanced stat expected goals for percentage to see this exact principle in action, as it uses expected goals models to determine how often a team can be expected to outscore their opponent based on shot quality. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, Artturi Lehkonen has been a net positive player by expected goals percentage 7 years running. In the advanced analytics era of hockey we live in, Expected goals is perhaps one of the greatest tools we have to evaluate hockey players, and for Lehkonen to have such year-to-year consistency, that's just completely underrated talent. Every stat I have just rattled off isn't a stat that is going to get him individual hardware at the NHL awards or garner him big national media attention, but they're the kind of stats that show why the Colorado Avalanche organization wanted his services, why they were okay with paying what it cost to acquire him, and why they made it a priority to keep him in the fold. He really does make teams better, and I haven't even mentioned his postseason impact yet. Alright, let's get the cliches out of the way first. When the Colorado Avalanche traded for Artturi Lehkonen, they traded for a player who had playoff experience, a player who knew how to score clutch goals. While both of these things would end up ringing true for the Avalanche, especially as Lehkonen would go on to score both the Western Conference and Stanley Cup winning goals, I'd rather focus on the on-ice impact numbers Lehkonen has had in the postseason throughout his NHL career so far. Going back to his rookie season in 2016, Lehkonen would appear in all 6 of Montreal's playoff games against the New York Rangers in the first round, and he had a pretty decent impact considering it was his first taste of the Stanley Cup playoffs. With Lehkonen on the ice, the Habs outshot the Rangers and held the edge by expected goals percentage. Sure, those numbers came in a small 6-game sample size, and Montreal did end up losing that series, but for a young Lehkonen, there was something to build off of moving forward. The Habs would miss the playoffs over the next 2 seasons, but with Montreal having qualified for the 2020 bubble playoffs as the East's 12th seed, Lehkonen was about to play like a man possessed. Whether it be by shot share, high danger chances, expected goals, all of those stats were at or nearing 60%. With Lehkonen on the ice, the Habs, more often than not, strongly controlled the on-ice battle against their opponent, even if Lehkonen himself wasn't lighting up the score sheet in the process. Montreal eventually bowed out in 6 games to the East's number 1 seeded Philadelphia Flyers in the first round, but these playoffs ultimately became the first big sign that Artturi Lehkonen wasn't just a regular season player. His impact on the game could translate to the postseason when the spotlight was at its brightest, and if any doubts remains, they'd be squashed only a season later. Obviously, there's the big goal that sent Montreal to the Cup Final in Game 6 against Vegas, but Lehkonen's underlying numbers continued to be strong for the 2nd consecutive postseason, which is especially impressive considering the kind of competition Lehkonen and the Habs had to face throughout the entirety of their run. They'd end up falling just short against the Tampa Bay Lightning in the final, but Lehkonen had managed to turn a lot of heads in his direction. And with each postseason he added under his belt, it just seemed like he was continuously taking that next step towards the ultimate prize. It just wouldn't be with the Montreal Canadiens. After all, only 8 months after playing in the Cup Final with Montreal, Lehkonen would be dealt to Colorado. And in his very first playoff run with the Avalanche, he was every bit the difference maker the team hoped for when they acquired him. Not only did the Avs outshoot and outchance their playoff opponents with Lehkonen on the ice, they had an expected goals percentage of nearly 60%. He was a monster on the ice, and who could possibly forget Lehkonen scoring the biggest goals in the biggest moments? For lack of a better term, Lehkonen truly was one of, if not the last missing piece of the Avalanche puzzle. But don't just take my word for it, hear it from the Avalanche players themselves. Mikko Rantanen was quoted as saying, "Everybody knows how good he is, how resilient he is. He checks, he defends hard, he kills penalties, plays on the power play, he scores big goals, goes to the hard areas. What else can you ask for from a player? A trade acquisition?" Cale Makar also chimed in with some praise of his own, telling the media, "That's why he's the best. He gets to the net and beats guys, and he gets rewarded." To have 2 of the league's best players offering such heavy praise, that really speaks volumes about the value Lehkonen brought to an Avs team that had seemingly found themselves stuck in the second round before they finally managed to break through, especially considering the fact that there were rumors connecting the Avalanche to other, more name-brand players on the trade market. None of those rumored deals ever came to fruition, but sometimes life just has a funny way of working itself out. Who knows what happens in an alternate universe if this trade or that trade happened? All we can say for certain is that in this reality we live in, Artturi Lehkonen and the Colorado Avalanche won the Stanley Cup, and neither would have it any other way.